they do in the winter.
Hello and welcome to the fourth in these podcasts from the Isles of Mull, Iona, Ulva and Gomitra. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Alistair Satchell. I'm a film and theatre maker based here on the island of Mull, and I'll be your host today. In this episode, I talk to Lucy MacKenzie. Lucy was brought up in Calgary at Calgary House. She was schooled away down south on the south coast of England, whilst always dreaming of her home on Mull. Life took Lucy on quite a series of adventures, seeing her settle in Italy for over 30 years, only to return to the UK eventually to Mull in 2005, where she's lived ever since. Lucy is a renowned gardener. Her garden at Cloiche has been featured in several high-profile magazines and can be found in the new Island Gardens book by Jackie Bennett and Richard Hanson. I'll put a link to the book in the blog. Our conversation covers a vast terrain. We talk about her life, work and travels, and mentions are made to the Happy Valley murder case, which was dramatised in the film White Mischief, which, like me, if you've not come across it before, I'll put a link to the Wikipedia page about the story on the blog. I don't want to spoil this one for you, there's lots of surprises in this podcast. I recorded this podcast yesterday, on the 18th of October, and edited it last night. I managed to snatch an hour with Lucy to talk about her life whilst I was out driving a minibus for Turismara, taking visitors from the ferry at Craignure to a boat trip at Ulva Ferry to go out and see seal pups in the Treshnish Isles. When I got home, there was an email waiting for me from Lucy, and it detailed more stories that she remembered whilst out gardening, so I'll read these at the end of the podcast if you'd like to hear them. The order of the podcasts is a bit of a random thing. I've got several recordings on my drive waiting to be edited and shared with you. I'm sort of curating them in a way that flows thematically as it appears to me, so there's a rough sense of order to them. I hate that word curate. It's really annoying. What are you doing with your facial hair? Well, I'm curating a goatee. Oh, no. Anyway, the thing with podcasts... What are podcasts? I don't want to know. Don't Google that. The thing with podcasts is that you can dip in and out of them in whichever order you so wish, so please feel free to pick and mix, obviously. Now, I'm chuffed to bits to say that this podcast has been sponsored by a new sponsor, who are Isle of Mull Cottages. Mull is a deservedly popular place for a holiday, and Isle of Mull Cottages have some really outstanding places to stay. They've got such a great range, there's something for everyone. They've really nice modern places with great views. They've also got older stone cottages in the most beautiful locations, as well as larger houses. Perfect for a family holiday, or maybe a gathering of friends. The great thing about booking a place with Isle of Mull Cottages is that they are a local business. They visit all their properties on a regular basis, so you know that what you're getting is going to be good. And with more than 100 places to choose from throughout the island, it means that all you need to do is enjoy planning your next stay and figuring out which of these stunning places to stay in. Have a look for yourself and visit www.isleofmullcottages.com. That's www.isleofmullcottages.com and have a look at their places. You'll also find heaps of great information about the island too, which will help inspire a visit, no doubt. Without further ado, I give you Lucy MacKenzie. Can I ask you to introduce yourself for the recording? Who are you?
Who am I? I call myself up here Lucy MacKenzie because that's my Christian name, and my maiden name, and it's much more appropriate to go by a Scottish name up here than not Penitson, which is my married name, because Penitson here nobody can pronounce and doesn't mean anything, and I like having a Scottish name up here, so I am Lucy MacKenzie. I'm a widow. I was born and brought up here, and eventually I moved out to Italy, and as one does, I met somebody out there and married an Italian. So that's why I ended up with an Italian surname.
And were you born on the island, or were you born...
I was born, not actually physically on the island. Well, nobody is born on the island nowadays, are they? But in those days, I think people were actually possibly born on the island.
Yeah.
No, I was born in... my parents were already living here, because they bought Calgary a year before I was born. But I was born in Aberdeen, in the nursing home there. But yes, I'm more or less born on the island, in as much as we were living here.
Aye. So your family, were they in Aberdeenshire before they were here?
My parents were both Aberdonians, yes.
Right. In the city itself or outside?
No, outside, in Ballata.
Right.
So they moved here in 1947, and 48, and I was born in 1949. So just made it as a Mull, I think.
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah. What was it? What was it like growing up? And was it Calgary House?
Yes, it was absolutely lovely growing up here. It was wonderful because we had so much freedom and everything was so wild. But it was probably a bit lonely. I was a very shy child. I was a very shy young person. I'm still actually quite shy. Yes. And I think it was growing up in such an isolated way because in those days there weren't parents that took you off to play groups and activities and down to see you could play with your friend or anything or play with any other children. You were just stuck there and that was the end of it. And since I didn't unfortunately go to school locally, I had very little contact with local children.
Right. Did you ever go to school in Mull at all?
No, we had governesses.
Oh, really?
Unfortunately, that was the way it was in those days. I think chiefly my parents were worried I might get a Scottish accent. God! I might have also made some friends.
I think you've done pretty well since, though, in fairness. But yeah. So, were you the only child in the family?
No, we had two brothers. But again, my elder brother was sent to boarding school in England at the age of 7. I was sent at the age of 10. Right. And so we met up in the holidays. Right. And we had a series of governesses who'd, like people do a bit nowadays, but much more then, would come rushing up to Mull to be governess to a family because it sounded so romantic. But then when they discovered that there was no public transport, nowhere to go, no cinema, nothing to do, they buggered off. Yeah. So we ended up having an awful lot of different governesses.
Are there any of them that stick in your memory at all that were particularly...
They didn't stick around long enough to stick in my memory.
Really?
I remember an Australian one who was quite nice from Perth, Australia. So I see Perth, Australia, I remember, but we did have a long series of government. I did actually do a few months schooling with Lucy MacKenzie, who was Alison Bartholomew's mother, right, okay. Who lived at Birch with Commander Mackenzie, whose parents had originally owned Calgary House. And we used to go for, I think, Guy longer, I think, but several months, possibly even a year, we used to walk down there to have lessons every day. And at that point, Birch was just a little bungalow-type cottage, and there was a little ladder which disappeared up into a loft where the bedroom was. And I used to be absolutely fascinated when Mrs. Mackenzie used to occasionally disappear up the ladder, longed to go up the ladder and see what was the other end of it.
Did you ever get a chance to go up in
the
end? Oh, still mystery. Aye.
So we did used to, but again, I was probably aged 5, my brother 8, and we walked down there quite happily.
So what did your parents do? What
my father was retired. My father was an awful lot older than my mother. He was retired from the army,
right?
And he was had some diplomatic job in Canada too for many years, and but he owned Antime Farm. But it was a very unpractical thing. You know, he didn't do much physical farming himself. He employed a farm manager, and farming I think it probably always lost money. Mm-hmm. But basically, he farmed because he liked doing that. But he was retired. He was 60, I think, when I was born. So.
Goodness, wow. So had he seen the First World War as well then?
Yeah, he fought in both wars. He was one of the organisers of a retreat to Dunkirk.
Really?
The evacuation of Dunkirk. In the downstairs toilet, there were all the papers from giving the orders for the evacuation of Dunkirk.
Goodness me. Did he ever talk about the experiences?
Never, ever. I learnt more about my father's war history from his obituaries than I did from him.
Really?
That generation, I think, never talked about war.
We can understand why.
Yeah, you can understand why.
Really young men. Yeah.
Yes, it was such one of my uncles died in the Somme, and it was just he never ever mentioned it.
Over 100 years later from the Somme, that word still chills, doesn't it? It really is quite something. And did he? Where was he in the First World War? Was he in Belgium, or was he?
I don't know. I know very little. I really know very little. He was wounded in both wars and spent part of both wars in convalescence, and but I know very little about what he did. But I do know that he was out in the Somme too, because we found his old diaries, and it's written in pencil, so it's difficult to write. But I did find the entry. It was so I suppose you had to be sort of laconic about it.
Yes.
Heard that Sloper's been injured, went to look for him, spent the whole day searching, couldn't find him, came back, and the next day commanders lent me his motorbike, went back again, found where Sloper was, but he was already dead. You know, just literally like that. I mean, because you had to be, I suppose you had to be like that, because otherwise you'd have just gone into meltdown, wouldn't you?
Totally. Yeah. That's extraordinary. And your mother, what's your mother's story, if you don't mind me asking?
My mother, well, again, she married, obviously, she was much younger than my father, but she met him just after the end of the war, I think. And she was actually, I think she'd lost her fiancé in the war, the Second War, obviously. Yeah. And she'd married somebody else on the rebound. And he was out in Germany, I think, for 11 months at a stretch. And during that time she met my father, and my elder brother arrived, and she filed, when her husband came back, she filed for divorce. Yes. And her husband contested it, and she said, look, you've been away for 11 months, there's a baby here, you must allow it. So I think it was, in those days, you know, divorce was something, and they were next door neighbours to the royal family, and they used to stalk and shoot for the royal family, and the royal family used to stalk for them, and I think it was a huge scandal.
Really?
And I think that was one of the they had to sell the estate because there was no money left. Right. I think my great-grandfather made an awful lot of money out, who came from modest origins, went out to India as a midshipman, left the ship, and went indigo, I think, and made an awful lot of money, huge amount of money in India. Came back and made some very good investments here, and bought the estate of Glenmick, right. Built a huge house, and had a big stalking estate and everything. So he was a very successful businessman, but the next two generations did nothing but spend all the money. And my father was the last of a family of six something to inherit, because everybody else had died, either in the war or somewhere. And by the time it got to him, there was no money left at all. In fact, my eldest aunt, Aunt Lucy, after who I'm named, was born in 1894, which sounds amazing. I mean, I know I'm not young, but still, but I could have an aunt because she was 20 years older than my father. Right. And she married Lord Hay. Do you know have you heard of White Mischief?
No, I don't know that.
And the scandal in Kenya when Jocelyn Errol was shot. It was a huge scandal. You don't know anything about that? Happy Valley. You've heard of a Happy Valley in Kenya? Yeah. Well, that all centred around my first cousin, amazingly, because we're a long way back. But since he was born, just about the same time, my father must have been, very, very small child when he was born. He was the centre. He was Jocelyn Errol, who was killed in the Happy Valley scandal. Huge scandal.
Oh goodness.
There was a film made called White Mischief, which was very, very popular about that. He had been having an affair with somebody's wife, and he got himself killed anyway.
Goodness.
Nobody quite knew how. Anyway, so my mother met my father, and they had to sell the estate, and so my father went and looked at various houses around Scotland, and in fact, among his letters, there's a letter saying, well, the day he came to see it here, and he said something about, he looked at several houses in Mull, actually, and he said he saw this one, and he put in an offer for half what they were asking. I think they were asking 14,000. He put an offer for 7,000 and went away not thinking any more of it. And the next thing he knew it was been accepted, because the house, I think, had been empty for 7 years, because it was, the Moorish estate was broken up and it was bought by the Department of Agriculture and broken up into small holdings, which are all those little houses scattered down the Calgary Road. The main farmhouse was Sunipal, not Calgary Farm. It was Sunipal, and in fact, Morag showed me once that they'd knocked down the back of the house because they wanted to make them more or less the same size as the other ones when they were off small holdings. They didn't want to have one bigger small holding than the other one. That's why we knocked down the back of the house. And but the estate was split up, and Calgary was left with just 27 acres, which is what it's got today. And I think it remained empty between 1940 and my father buying it in 1948. My brother and I can't find any record of anybody else in the middle, so I should think it was in a pretty ghastly state when he bought it. Yeah. And I know my mother spent quite a long time in the Western Isles Hotel while they were trying to patch the house up before she could move in, pregnant with me, and they've patched the house up and made it habitable. It's for sale again now, you know. Apparently it's under offer.
Oh, right. It's always interesting.
We shall see.
Yeah.
My brother was actually quite interested, but I think there are huge problems.
Yeah, I have friends who've been caretakers there in the past. The previous owners were always very good at employing local people to be caretakers there. And I think there have been issues with damp and ingress of water and render and so.
More than damp, I think it's just wet, running water. Yeah, but I hope it goes to. I do hope somebody goes and lives there, and it's not just a holiday home abandoned 3/4 of the year.
Well, that would be fantastic if it was, yeah.
Because it's such a lovely house.
What are your memories of growing up in the house? Is there anything that stands?
Oh, it was a lovely house to be in, because there was staircase at the back, staircase up to front, so you could run round, tear around in circles, and go up on the roof. And the roof space was full of bees.
Really?
Yeah, there were masses and masses. I mean, you walked on a carpet of about 3 inches of bees like this, because my father had experts in, but they'd never managed to get rid of these bees without taking off the roof. Now they have got rid of the bees. I don't know which of the subsequent owners got rid of it. So you crunch over these bees and go up on the roof. But the best thing was, apart from that, you could go up on the hill behind, because we could go wherever we wanted. Nobody was bothered about us. Something happening to us, but we could go boating, so we had a boat down the bay from when I was fairly small, and we went lobster fishing every day, and that's what we spent our whole summer doing.
That's fantastic.
That's why listening to Nick Turnbull, I was sort of linking in. So from the time we got our first little boat, Tamarisk, a little rowing dinghy, a little wooden rowing dinghy, when my elder brother was 10 and I was 7, and 2 creels, and off we went. And nobody said, we didn't have proper life jackets. We had sort of jackets, our jackets had sort of wings, inflatable wings in the side, but of course we never inflated them, and we never did up the jackets, so it wasn't much good. And nobody seemed to bother about us, you know, it was just, don't be late for lunch. That was the end of it. Can you imagine letting your son go off for the whole morning with a couple of creels?
Well, that's Gordy Turnbull's talked about that as well, of the things that they got up to in boats. Kenny and him as kids, and it's like, he wouldn't let his own kids do it now, and it's.
And yet it was much better. It was a much better upbringing. It's just everybody's so obsessed now, health and safety and all the rest of it, and but it was wonderful. Yeah. Off we rode in the morning with our creels and rode round and round and trying to decide where to drop them, because we didn't really know what we were doing. Commander MacKenzie had built down to below his boat, down to the rocks, a wonderful swing bridge. He'd built it all by hand. It was absolutely brilliant. So you could get down to you didn't have to pull your dinghy up. You had it on a running rope. You could just walk down over this swinging bridge. It was amazing. It was a really brilliant feat, and then unfortunately it was allowed to fall to pieces, so there was nothing left of it now. But off we went down over the swinging bridge and pulled in our dinghy and did all the right knots and rowed off. Fantastic. And there were a lot more. Well, there were definitely more lobsters when we started doing it than when we finished, when we were teenagers, because when we had half a dozen creels, we'd come home with 1, 2, 3 lobsters a day, and
that's fantastic.
We used to do very well. Yeah. And I noticed Nick Turnbull talking about the big boats coming down from Malay. Yes, occasionally these big boats would come, put a whole string of pots in the front of the bay, and we get over taking all our lobsters. Yeah. But we used to get a lot of lobsters, a lot of crabs, and we bait them. If we got mackerel, we baited with mackerel, because cuddies, which you caught more easier, were not very good for bait because they were too soft, not just went through them. But chiefly we used to go and shoot rabbits on the mackerel in the evening, and we baited them with rabbit.
And that worked well?
Oh, that worked very well, because the rabbit stuck in well, and you could get about 6 joints out of a rabbit. 2 fore joints, 2 hind joints, and a middle bit. Yeah. And if you were pushed for it, you could put the head in too with that way round. I think that is
Well, that's the way people used to fish for eels, I believe, was with horses' heads.
With horses' heads?
Yeah, you'd put a horse's head in the water and the eels would go in and burrow into it and you'd bring the horse's head up and get your eels, which... rather not. Did anyone teach you how to do that, or it's just a couple of creels, on you go?
Well, I remember the first time we just rowed round the bay when we were peering over the side, when we had dropped these creels, and eventually we dropped them in a not very suitable place out by the pier. And the next day we got 2 crabs, 2 brown crabs. We were so pleased with ourselves. Yeah. And eventually we worked out the better places to get them. When we got a bigger boat, when we were a bit older, we had a bigger boat for an outboard boater, so we could get even outside the bay. Yeah. But for a rowing boat, we were just in the bay, and we'd go over to the pier or go down to Lannisker. Okay. You know, Lannisker's that reef halfway down the left-hand side of Calgary Bay. Okay. That's Lannisker. Lannisker was a good place for lobsters. But sometimes, you know, it'd be quite rough, and it'd be quite a big swell. It'd be sucking us in against the rocks, and I used to get quite scared, but I couldn't say anything because my brothers, you know, couldn't admit that my brother I was scared, and it was only a few years ago that he admitted to me that he got pretty scared too, but he couldn't admit he was scared either. So both of us saying, "Yeah, we're going a bit closer. No, a bit closer. Yeah, don't worry about the way. Go in a bit closer." And both of us were absolutely terrified.
That wouldn't have been me. I would have been over the side being sick. Gosh.
No, it was wonderful. So the whole morning in the summer was spent lobster creeling, and in the afternoon up in the hill or fiddling around with our bicycles or down the beach.
So when you went to school, was school quite nice to have contact with other folk, or was it quite...
Not at the beginning, not when I was sent first to boarding school, because I simply didn't know how to behave with others. Because having 2 brothers, I only knew how to behave with other boys, which they beat me up or I beat them up, basically. That was what it ended up. And I discovered you can't do that with girls.
So you were top dog then, basically?
So I was a bit hopeless at my first school. I was only there for 2 years, but I mean, can you imagine my parents living in the Isle of Mull sent me to school on the coast, on the Sussex coast.
Oh my, that's miles away.
I mean, can you imagine? It's just amazing.
It's a completely
Couden Beach.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, they made our lives so complicated. The complications of getting us up and down from these schools and across London, and it was a total nightmare. We could practically never come back for half term because, you know, obviously, no, we did never come back for half term. Occasionally, our parents would get down to see us because you got 2 week half term for us was we had 2 weekends off when we could go home or see people during the term. But you know, it was just impossible. Why couldn't we have been sent if we had to be sent to boarding school? Why couldn't they have sent us to a Scottish one? There's plenty of perfectly good schools in Perthshire and everything. Not Couden Beach. Crikey! Beggars belief.
What do you remember of the journeys there? Were they kind of...
Endless, because you had the sleeper and then some friend or a company called Universal Aunts, which did sort of ferrying of children. And
Universal Aunts?
Yes.
That's amazing.
The company in London that sort of, you know, looked after people. They'd pick you up off a train and they'd take you around London and you'd have bacon and eggs for lunch in the Lowndes Corner House, and then they'd shovel you off the train, another train, and off you'd go to Couden Beach, or well, subsequently the second school I went to was in Sevenoaks, but it wasn't much closer. It was a total nightmare journey. And they were very expensive, of course, because the schools were very expensive, and the travel was very expensive, and Universal Arts. Then we spent our whole lives being told we couldn't do this and we couldn't do that because our schools were so expensive, and we'd think, well, actually, we don't want to go to our schools. In fact, my brother, he was a black sheep of the family because he was the first son of an old Etonian not to get into Eton. Ooh. So my elder brother, terrible, the scandal. So he went to a school called Stowe. And he created absolute mayhem. He was terrible. And at the age of about 15, he had a terrific talking to from my father saying, if you don't pull up your socks and behave, I'll take you away from Stowe and I'll send you to Oban High. And he said, oh, I'd really love that. My father couldn't believe it. He just couldn't believe that somebody could prefer to go to Oban High rather than to a posh boarding school.
That's fantastic.
And in fact, he left school as soon as he could because he was just absolutely hopeless. He could pass any exams and has been very successful in life thereafter, but it was just completely wrong for him, as it was pretty wrong for me.
What does your brother do now? What did he do?
He sort of does things with property and down in Cornwall. He's done very well.
Yeah.
That's why he was able to think about buying Calgary House.
Yeah.
And my other brother's out in, also does things with property. My other brother's out in San Diego,
Really?
and he builds on contaminated sites. In other words, he buys an old chemical factory or whatever, cleans them up, and then builds on them. So I think it's quite a sort of niche thing. He's done well too.
From finishing boarding school, did you do finishing school or anything like that at all? Is that something that existed
Not
at that
quite.
time?
Almost.
Yeah, it's just sort of Mary Poppins style.
Yeah, miss.
One would never know. Yeah.
And I worked in London for a bit. No, where did I go? First I went to Paris.
Oh, what did you do in Paris?
Dressmaking and design, all strange things, yes.
So do you speak fluent French as well?
I did speak French. I can just about communicate to the B&Bs this morning. The French ones I got at the moment can't speak a word of English, and we do manage to. I have managed to send them on their journeys and book them into places, but no. When I learned Italian, my French kind of went out the window. But I know I did spend 8 months in Paris, and but Paris was fun. It was much more fun being in England. But I came back to London, but I just didn't enjoy the life there. I just didn't. I worked in a various age. I think I was a sort of temp, and I worked in various ages. But I worked in an advertising agency. But I just didn't enjoy the scene I was caught up in, because I was inevitably caught up in the. I was a sort of debutante. I have to confess, and that got me into a scene that I really, really, really didn't enjoy. And then between ex-school friends and that scene, I ended up a life I wasn't enjoying at all. So that's when I went out to Rome.
What was it about that life that you didn't enjoy? Was it sort of the shallowness of it, or was it?
Basically.
Yeah.
It was all this sort of hunting, shooting and fishing thing, which is not really me. And rushing off to always house parties at the weekend and everything. And I just didn't enjoy it. So I went out to Rome. And that's more or less where my Italian part of my life started.
What was the catalyst beyond not enjoying that scene? What made you go to Rome specifically?
Well, I wanted to go abroad, and my mother she'd also wanted to go abroad when she was young, and it had been all fixed. She was going to Rome, and then the war broke out, and she couldn't go, and so she encouraged me to go to Rome because it had always been her dream, and so I set off for Rome.
Wow.
I found did I get a job? I found it. They used to have the announcements in the front of all the small announcements in front of the Times. I got a job through that as a chauffeur's companion to an Australian woman with a 14-year-old son, which was totally ridiculous. I'd just taken my driving test in the Isle of Mull, and here was me setting off to be a chauffeur's companion in Rome, of all places.
Oh my goodness.
But in fact, I never got to drive a car because the woman took one look at me and decided she didn't like me and said, you had 3 days to leave my house. And I don't know what she didn't like me, because in those days I was quite shy. I mean, I can imagine people not liking me now, but in those days I was really quite sort of shy and unobtrusive, and I wouldn't have said the wrong things or got in the way like I would now. And so I found a job as an au pair with a family who actually spoke French, so I ended up speaking French the whole time because I already spoke it. And so after a few months I found another job down in Calabria, right in the toe. And in those days Calabria was really undeveloped. I mean, now, Calabria is all huge hotels and everybody goes down there, but this was the first hotel in Tropea, which is the sort of main tourist centre now, I think. It was the first hotel that had ever, tourist hotel that had opened there on the beach. And Calabria was amazingly primitive in those days, really amazingly primitive. because it wasn't. It was just another world, you know. It was still all the men going around on donkeys, the woman walking along behind with carrying everything on her head and everything. It was extraordinary.
What period was that? Was it the 60s?
No, it meant, well, I went to 70, so I must have been 18. Yeah, well, I suppose it was, yes. I must have been 18. I was born in 49.
Okay.
Yes, so it was late 60s. And so I worked in this hotel, and we were forbidden, in fact, to wear trousers. I think it was me and another foreigner in hotels, because we were forbidden to wear skirts. We had to wear trousers, so as not to show our legs. And I remember once, if we went out of a hotel, because the hotel was down the beach, and I remember once in the evening everybody was going up to some festa in some village, and I was wearing a skirt, and I just tagged along. And the next day, the road above the hotel was lined with men looking down, because they'd seen this foreign girl with her legs.
Legs, goodness
It
me.
was amazing. I got in terrible trouble for hotel managers. That was really, everything was really primitive down there in those days. It was lovely.
What were the kind of festas and things like that? Because that's something that...
They had really lovely old-style village festas, but again, the men would walk down one street to the side of the street, and the girls would walk down the other. And unless you were officially engaged, which would normally be arranged by the family, you couldn't be seen with somebody of the opposite sex. It was very much segregated.
Goodness me.
So I spent the whole summer down there, and I came back to England for a bit, and I went to Rome and started working. No, I went to Florence first. I worked in Florence first.
What was Florence like? That's somewhere I've always wanted to go.
Florence was lovely. I've always loved Florence, but it was very, very hard to find a job that paid the rent. Basically,
Oh, sure.
it was I had a possible time working in Florence. I was really. I remember I shared a flat with friends, and literally we used to, we ate boiled eggs or ricotta, or we couldn't even afford mozzarella or something. That was out of it. It was just beyond our budget. We lived on nothing.
Mm.
It was starvation diet, and we just didn't have any money at all. And so eventually, my mother, again looking in the Times announcements, saw that Valentino, a dressmaker, was looking for an assistant down in Rome, and so she told me about this. So I trottled off down to Rome and got the job there.
Goodness
And
me.
Rome was the salary looked pretty good, but in fact it wasn't quite that good, because Rome was much more expensive than Florence, but still at least it was a living wage. And so that's when I started off living in Rome.
Goodness me. And so were you there kind of at the dawn of Valentino's career, or were you...
He was already very much established. I mean, he's been going on forever. It's amazing. I saw a photograph of him the other day. This is, 40 years ago? 40, 50, 60. So I was 20, 40 years ago. I saw a photograph of him the other day. He still looks exactly identical. God knows how many facelifts he'd had in the meantime. It's absolutely amazing.
Wow.
He's just sort of cast in stone.
Yeah.
What do you think it was about Valentino that made him...
His dresses were amazing. He was absolutely amazing. I mean, especially in those days when they had these wonderful ball gowns and wedding dresses and everything. They were really beautiful. He was brilliant. He was totally brilliant. He made the most wonderful clothes, but he was very, very difficult man. Goodness me. Screaming hysterics and all these dogs, and I was trying to run his dogs and his servants and everything in his villa, and it was absolutely impossible. Every time a dog became fashionable, because even more than in Britain, dogs have fashions, he'd get that dog, and then the next one would come along and that dog would be cast aside. So the whole villa was surrounded by different areas for the different dogs, because that Great Dane would have definitely gone and eaten the Chihuahua, and the Chihuahua would have definitely... It was an absolute nightmare.
That's amazing.
Keeping them all separated. There's dozens of these dogs, and he had this his wonderful old mother who was basically, she was very, very humble stock, and now there she was, elevated to with mother of Valentino, so living up there. And I remember one day, Majordomo, Major. How do you say it in English? Majordomo was saying to me that Valentino had looked out of a window and he'd seen these funny green things coming up in his borders. What are these green things on my borders? Oh, your mother's been planting spinach. That's flower borders.
Yeah.
She was basically a little country woman at heart, and she couldn't imagine how a space of being wasted between these silly flowers. You had to put some spinach in there and a carrot down the line.
That's very practical.
It was quite an experience.
How long were you with Valentino for?
About a year, and then I moved on to another company. I worked for American Express, and then I worked for an American, and then when I met my husband, we moved out of Rome, just outside Rome, and I stopped working officially and started trying to put a garden and a house in order.
So gardening was a thing even then?
Well, yeah, sort of hacking away at the ground.
And can you talk a little bit about your husband? How did you meet him?
Just at a party, as usual, friend's house. And so that way I settled down to It was fun at first, not to be working properly. I'd always been scrabbling to try and pay the rent and do everything, and it was good. But I got bored.
Yeah.
I need to be active.
Yeah, I can see that.
And just running a house and getting a garden sorted and everything, and then so I started when I got a horse. I started when my daughter was born, and she started riding and everything. I started teaching. No, before she even started riding, I started teaching kids on ponies and doing some crafts and everything. I'd always wanted to ride. I'd always wanted to ride as a child, desperately. And we could perfectly well kept a pony at Calgary. It wasn't exactly, I only need some sort of rough little thing that I could jump on, but no, we couldn't possibly have a pony because our schools cost so much.
Gosh.
And so I have ridden occasionally with friends or at school or something, and then I started riding seriously when I was married. And I always hoped that my daughter would ride because that's what I always wanted to do. And in fact, from the moment she could first saw a horse, there's never anything else she wanted to do in life. It's just what she's always only wanted to do.
And she's done very, very well with horses
She's done
since.
very well. I mean, she's got her own yard now down in Gloucestershire and 23 boxes and riding for a lot of people.
She was riding for the Italian team as well, wasn't she?
She is part of it. She's, as long as she's got the right horse at the right moment, she rides. She missed out on the World Championships this summer because she, why? It was a horse that done something, and she missed out on the last Olympics because she broke her collarbone. But generally, she gets, if there's a team, if all's going well, she's on it.
And if you don't mind me asking, what did your husband do?
He was in aviation. He immatriculated planes. If you've got to buy a private plane, it has to be all sort of tested before you can fly it or something. And he designed and built some small private airports, and he had a distributor for aircraft fuel down on Ciampino Airport. And so it was all to do with he loved planes and boats and things.
Fantastic.
Not exactly my sort of thing, but it's fine.
So what took you to New York then?
That was a long time earlier.
Right.
Well, you got to put everything in. That was when I was working in Florence still. Yeah, that was the last bit of my working in Florence. When I was, I started working for a shoe company. Well, I met a guy who had a shoe company, and I started working for him. And we were together as business and personal relationship for 3 years, and we made shoes in Italy and we sold them in America.
Gosh.
So we went backwards and forwards.
Right.
And where were you living in New York?
Just down from the Empire State Buildings. We had offices in the Empire State Building.
Goodness me, really?
Yeah.
Was that a pleasure or a nuisance?
No, it was quite fun. I liked him. Looked out the window and there were these teeny little things miles below your cars.
Yeah.
And I don't like cities. I've never liked cities, but I did quite like New York because in those days, anyway, it was more like a lot of villages attached together.
Yeah. Totally.
You go to different areas, and it was. I quite enjoyed New York, and we used to travel around the States a lot. But as I say, we never saw anything. We just saw airports and convention centres with shoe shows. So, but 3 years we did backwards and forwards until our relationship fell apart. So at that point, I quit out and went to spend the summer backpacking around Greece, and then went back to Florence.
So you're quite young at that point as well.
Yeah, I was 24 when we left. When Larry and I split up, And I was 26 when I met Giorgio, and I think we married when I was about 29, 30.
Gosh, aye. Quite something.
But I still used to, because the house, my father died in 1973, and the house was sold in my mother sold the house in 1975, but I still used to come back here most years. I spent a couple of Christmases with Profumos, who, Philip Profumo bought the house. And then when Victoria was born, we used to come back, when she was about 4, we used to come back every summer and spend a couple of weeks here.
So the Profumos were here as well. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, Philip Profumo,
Right,
the brother of John Profumo, who was otherwise differently inclined to his brother, and
Not so scandalous.
had a friend. Well, yeah, no, he had a friend who, a male friend, who liked doing up houses. So Philip Profumo obviously had an awful lot of money, so he'd buy big houses for his friend to do up. So Calgary was, from being rather shabby and holes in the carpets and everything in our day, looked a bit like Eaton Square, little sort of checks and stripes and flowers and sprigs all over the place, which wasn't quite, still very, very, very fond of the house, and they came up quite a lot. And then it was sold, after that it was sold to Longlumet, who was a French-Swiss guy. I don't know if you ever came across him.
No.
They came up on holiday, but then that went wrong too, because I think his wife's mother was murdered in Paris, and she went a bit funny, and their relationship fell apart, and so they sold it, and that was when the Kelseys bought it.
Right.
So it's changed hands several times since our days.
Yeah.
The majority of your adult life was spent in Italy then.
Yeah, from basically 32 years I was in Italy.
What would you say the kind of advantages of...
Which isn't the majority now, unfortunately. But it was the majority when I came back here.
What would you say the thing about Italy was? What kept you in Italy?
I really like the vibe in Italy.
Yeah.
Everything's a bit easier, and people are a bit more laid back, and rate d'arrangiarsi. You get round things. Sometimes here it sends me bonkers that everything's got to be done by the book.
Yes.
If we've got to obey that law, not only will we obey it 100%, we'll obey it 120%.
Oh, yes.
That's why we're so hopeless in the EU, because
Exactly
everybody
that.
else, we make this law and everybody says, right, we'll
Stick
do
with
that,
that.
and
Yeah.
we'll do that, and we'll do justice. No, even if it absolutely clobbers us, we've got to absolutely obey it. Oh, but there's no flexibility.
Yeah.
Oh. Italians are much more flexible. Oh, come on, yeah, we'll do it this way. We'll invent something. We'll fix that. We'll get around it. They say Italian bureaucracy used to send me crazy, but British bureaucracy is probably worse. Only you can usually find somebody at the end of a line or at the end of a phone who will explain things here. In Italian bureaucracy, you've got it's more difficult to find out. It's more labyrinthal, and of course, people are just a bit more laid back, a bit happier. I think I'm a bit happier. I like the food.
Yeah, the food's amazing.
I'm not crazy about British food, generally speaking. Some of it's okay.
The odd steak pie here and there. No. Oh.
In Italy, the food tradition comes from the bottom. If you want to know how to go make a good dish, you go and ask the woman in the grocery shop, or the farmer's wife, or the woman in the market, or everything. Here, it all filters down from the middle classes, which is not. That's not how it
Although in
works.
Scotland, in our family certainly, we have a book called the Glasgow School of Cookery Cookbook. I don't know if you know that at all.
I've heard of it.
It's phenomenal. It's got so many kind of brilliant dishes and like really simple cookery. And quite a lot of people went to dough school. And there was like a lot of young women certainly went to dough school for catering and things like that. In my family certainly, and so that was one of the key texts there as well. And that's recipes for sheep's head broth and things like that in there, and potted heed and all these kind of poor people meals. And so that I think there's something of that that's from the bottom up in that book, and that's when I went to university, my mum gave me a copy of that to go and I learned how to cook from it. So I learned how to do a roux from my mum for making macaroni cheese, but everything else is pretty much from the Glasgow School of Cookery Cookbook and Ken Holmes' Hot Wok. which is one of my favourite books still to this day. Oh, I love that book. So, but yeah, Italian food is, I mean, that's one of the reasons I love food, but as you can tell, but I really, really want to go to Italy to try kind of Italian food in Italy and be, quite remarkable.
I mean, Italy's got, Scotland's got both. I mean, Scotland's got mountains and a bit of skiing and the sea and things too. And Italy has everything, just like here. You know, you can go and ski in an hour or two, and you can go and swim in an hour or two, and you can climb a mountain. There's a lot of being long and narrow, a bit like Britain. There is a lot of variation in scenery and topological. It's a very varied country. There's an awful lot there.
So you came back to Britain. What, if you don't mind me asking, what was the catalyst for coming home?
Giorgio died ages ago. My goodness, it makes me sound. So Vittorio was 8, so he died. And we stayed on. We were thinking of coming back almost straight away, but we came back to look for a house in England. For a month over one Christmas. It just happened to be one of those months when the mist was down every day and it was freezing cold, and I thought, oh no, maybe not. So we stayed on for another, so we decided to wait until she'd finished school and come back for university. But in fact we came back 2 years earlier, chiefly because over various reasons. I decided I wanted to come back. I'd had enough. I wanted to come back to Scotland. I desperately wanted to come back to Mull. I was beginning to feel really homesick. And her riding, she was obviously going to be very good at riding, and all she wanted to do was basically be a professional rider. And the place we had the horse out there, the guy who ran it was a psychopath and a maniac, and I just got fed up. I couldn't bear to see her treated like this, and by myself treated like that. And so one day I got really cross of him, and I said, Vittoria, shall we go back to Britain? And she said, yes, Mummy, let's go back to Britain. And so, literally, I came over to England, because we obviously have to go to England because of her riding and because of university and everything. I came back to England, and in a week I found a yard for the horse and a house to rent and a sixth form college. And so that was all done, and the house out there, we made it actually very nice. It was a nice little house we bought after Giorgio died, and that sold very, very quickly, which is unusual in Italy. I couldn't believe the market when I came back here. Everybody buys and sells houses. You know, think we'll have another bedroom. Sell the house. Think that one's larger garden. Sell the house. In Italy, if somebody buys a house, it's for life. So the market wasn't volatile there, but we did sell the house very quickly, and then we came back at the end of 2000. She actually, we stayed there for the European Junior Championships, because she was on the team, and she won the European Championships, and the next day she was on the lorry with horses coming back to England. So it's great. It worked out really nicely. It couldn't have been better.
Nice beginning to it, yeah.
Because also she came back to Britain, and people had heard of her name. She was already a rider that people had heard of, because she'd won the European Championships. And so I started working in sort of nursery gardens and things and shops and whatever. And she was going to sixth form college. And then I stayed down working in the nursery garden. I was working and then I started working actually doing gardening for other people, because I wanted to learn a bit more about plants beyond seeing a little plant in a pot and having potted it on and all the rest of it. And I stayed on until she'd finished university, because basically she needed somebody to look after things. Well, she was at university, so she could get home and leap on a horse for the weekend and then rush off again, and moved back up here in 2005. But I built the house beforehand. I built the house when we were still in Italy, actually. So this house was basically built over a telephone, which was not a very good way of building a house. Everything went wrong. Everything. It was people still shudder when they remember. I used to get these frantic telephone calls from a friend saying, Lucy, you must come. I said, I can't come over. How can I come over? I've got a child's got to go to school. I've got to And because the builder we had contracted to, we all knew he had a wee drink problem, but it didn't worry me too much, because I didn't need to build the house built instantly, as long as it was sort of up. But unfortunately the drink problem intensified while he was building this house, and he just disappeared. And the nobody had been paid. I'd sent over money, but nobody had been paid, and the stuff was rotting out in the garden. It was an absolute disaster.
Oh no, that's horrible.
Oh, it was a disaster. It was my own fault because I should have gone with Norrie. I only got 2 quotes off the island after we'd asked for about 6, and I should have gone with Norrie MacDonald. His quote was quite a lot higher. I mean, a lot higher than this guy, but it was a false economy because in the end it would cost me less. So much happens.
We looked around when we were building our house as well, and we looked at different people, but we thought, well, we know that Norrie does things to time.
It's done roughly to time and done well. In fact, when I did the upstairs, it was Norrie, and he was fantastic. He couldn't have done a better job. It went really well.
So the house here, was there a ruin here previously?
There was a wee boffy. It had a sort of tin roof on it, but it hadn't been inhabited since 1950 or something. It was inhabited, the last inhabitant, Katie Mary used to tell me about her. Katie Mary, she died last year. The house, I think, is going on the market, sadly. She was Mary Farrad. She was known as Mary Oyster. And she was a strange lady who used to wander along the shore collecting all this rubbish. And apparently she slept in a box bed, but the box bed was very high up because she had all this rubbish underneath it she used to collect. So basically, I think I'm a sort of reincarnation of her, of all the rubbish I collect on the shore. It was the oyster.
Good.
So I think it's quite appropriate.
And the garden, you've had an incredible amount of success with the garden, really.
It's been amazing, actually, because I came back gardening for other people, and that's what I intended to do, garden for other people and sell a few plants. But when I saw people were interested in this garden, so I put up a garden open notice, and more people came in, and everything sort of snowballed. So I dropped everybody else and just concentrated on selling the plants I could propagate and having people coming around the garden. And it still amazes me that people are so appreciative of this garden. I get the most amazing comments on it, and I've been in I've had articles in about 7 magazines and various books. Was that book? Did you see that book behind you, Island Gardens?
Yes.
I mean, not only have they given me the front cover, but they've given me a bigger spread than anybody except for Tresco inside. And I don't know, my rather weird ideas seem to strike a chord, because you see all these photographs of gardens with wonderful herbaceous borders and everything beautifully laid out and everything wonderful, and I think, ooh, ah. But somehow this garden seems to strike a chord. I don't know. People just seem to love it.
What would you say your approach to gardening is? Is it doing bits by section, knowing what different plants do what, or?
I just basically, I started off by making a path the whole way around, and then just planted out from a path. But there's no great plan. No. Nothing's written down, nothing was ever put down on paper, committed to paper. Just basically, I want to grow that plant, where can I put it? Right, shove it in there.
I know that.
And then all the rubbish, I pick up all this, since I do so much beach combing, the big bits go in the garden, small bits go into my crafts, and the big bits go into the garden. And that thing makes a nice sort of focal point, and that thing makes a nice stand for a plant, and that bit of driftwood will look great at the corner of that border, and in they go. And then I've picked up all... Because when I was a child, there was so much old farm machinery and ironwork lying around. I mean, every fence line had 2 or 3 bedsteads in it. Yes. And when I came back, I realised they were all disappearing. So I started sort of collecting them up, going around all the old farm tips and saying, can I have that bedstead out of your fence line? And do you want that old cartwheel? And most people were just too glad to get rid of the stuff. And I've incorporated it all into the garden. And it's amazing how many people... I mean, basically, it's probably pretty kitsch, I think. I think it's a bit naff. But
no, I think it's unique. It's its own thing.
But it's amazing how many people say, oh, I do love how you've incorporated the old stuff. Or, oh, I've always wanted to do something like that. My husband says, no, I really mustn't, but it looks really nice. And now he's a bit convinced. Maybe I can... Mm-hmm. It's amazing how people it really resonates for people. They really like seeing the old things. And I love the old stuff. I always feel, I mean, whether it's Ulva or who it is, but somebody should collect the bigger bit, because I haven't got space here to collect the big bits of farm machinery, you know, the things for digging up potatoes and the hay turners, all this. There's so much stuff rotting all over the place, and Ulva's full of it. Collect it all up, not paint it and make it all fancy, just put it somewhere and label it so people know what that thing was for planting turnips or whatever.
There's a brilliant programme by Jonathan Meades called The Isles of Rust. I don't know if you've come across it at all. It's a part of a series he did called Off Kilter, looking at Scotland, and Jonathan Meades is an art critic and artist, I think, as well. But The Isles of Rust is a way of imagining Harris and Lewis together as one island where things decay. And it's all about beauty and decay. And so there's lots of lovely shots of cars and ditches, you know, at the side of the sea just rotting away and things. And rather than saying, isn't this horrible, he actually says, look at the beauty of this. Look at the colour and the landscape that's come from this, and look how it's reflected in the metal as it decays through the seasons. And it's just like, oh gosh, it's such a nice way of looking at things.
I mean, the old stuff, I mean, now everything's plastic, and plastic doesn't decay nicely. But the old car, I mean, when I was a child, all the old cars turned into hen houses, and most of them looked pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
And in terms of gardening, are there any specific challenges that you want to explore with gardening at all? Is there one thing that's I've always wanted to try and grow pineapples?
Not really. I just now I've got that piece of land out there, a bit where I cleared the bracken. I didn't have it fenced when I got it. I just wanted to ensure myself against the possibility of having a building plot. I didn't fence it because I didn't think I'd be able to clear the bracken because it's such a steep slope and the bracken was so thick there. But I've cleared the bracken.
Nice.
So now I'm going to plant native trees and sprinkle around some basic wildflower seeds, because it's so sad that there's no regeneration of trees in this island, because between the deer and the sheep, we just haven't the hope. Trees, they spring up all over the place, but the moment they get more than an inch high, they get down. Yes. And we've got far too many deer in this island, and not culled at all, especially around here. It's absolutely hopeless around here. In fact, Ian's now fenced he got a grant, and he's deer fenced all the field in front, because I counted, I think, 87 head of deer there one morning last year. I mean, how can you run a farm when you've got 87 head of deer eating all your grass? So I just want to get a few more native trees going out there. It'll give me great satisfaction from my little tiny patch of proper native trees.
There you go. That's some of Lucy's tales. I'm so pleased that Lucy agreed to talk to me. She was very shy about it at first, so thank you very much for your time, Lucy. It's very much appreciated. It's worth mentioning that as well as a beautiful garden, Lucy also runs a B&B at her home at Cloiche. I'll put a link to her site in the blog so you can see it. As I mentioned at the start, Lucy sent some more memories to me in an email, and they are as follows. How I loved birds. Wee ones, not the ferocious raptors that are fashionable nowadays, but I had to keep quiet about it, as it was considered a bit girly. And I had 2 brothers, but when I went up onto the hill behind the house, I could lie in the heather and listen to a chorus of skylarks. There are hardly any of them nowadays. Too many raptors. How I used to kneel in the back seat of my mother's Morris Minor convertible with our guns and shoot rabbits and hoodies as we drove along. Imagine doing that nowadays. All the picnics we went on, almost every week to Iona or McKinnon's Cave or the Fossil Tree or wherever. Caves and reputedly haunted houses are great favourites. In the early days we were driven by Jimmy Sharp, who was the taxi driver in Tobermory if my father couldn't come. He was a wonderful, very funny man with a tall, beautiful wife called Polly. Jimmy and my father got on very well, and I have a photo of them together. My father, 6 foot 6 inches, Jimmy about 5 foot tall. Then my mother got a driving licence, but was an appalling driver, and the Tosta de Bray is forever linked to the smell of burning clutch in my mind. We built many elaborate tree houses in the trees down the drive, many of which are still standing, but the house is long gone. There was so much driftwood in those days, we could add a story after a big storm with just wood collected on Calgary Beach, where you never find driftwood nowadays. Once a timber-carrying boat was wrecked, and everyone built sheds and things. We built a boat shed. Kim Luscombe tells me that the original house where the Pattersons live was built with the fruits of that shipwreck. Lugged up the hill from Rudall. Quite a feat. Another thing you never see on Calgary Beach, or any other nowadays, are glass bottles. There used to be lots, all of which needed investigating in case they contained a message. I found 3. There was a man with a wooden leg called Uncle Bill who lived in the pier house at Cloiche, who organised a rounders match for all and sundry every summer, to be finished before the tide came in. And Viola Craig Cowan from Achnadrish organised a barbecue at Calgary. She had the first television I ever saw in Mull, aged 11. It was all fuzzy lines, but fascinating. We used to go out to Lunga with the Treshnish launch when they went to gather the sheep. One travelled home, squashed in with sheep with their legs tied together in the bottom of a boat. It left from Calgary Pier, in a good state in those days. Puffers used to unload coal on the beach, and folk used to go down with tractors, and I think horse-drawn carts too to collect it. There was a ploughing match with horses at Calgary every year, and how you could buy creels for lobstering from £1 from an old man who used to sit on the pier in Tob making them. There you go. Thank you again to Isle of Mull Cottages for sponsoring the podcast. I really appreciate it. Their sponsorship pays for the hosting of the podcast and other technical things. And I must just say on a personal note how good Ruben's videos of the island are. He's got a lovely way with film, and his aerial work in particular is among the most beautiful representations of the island I've ever seen. Do have a look at their website. There's loads of great videos on there with all sorts of information about the island on there. www.isleofmullcottages.com. As these podcasts take quite a lot of time to make, I'm also looking to fundraise through donations. So if you feel like it and are able to, please feel free to donate the cost of a cup of coffee or even a sausage roll, wherever you may be, through the website. You'll see a donate tab there where you can donate if you so wished. But don't worry if you can't or don't want to. I'd much rather you listened than you didn't. And on that note, there's a few people I'd like to thank. David, Caroline and Neil, thank you so much for your donations. I really appreciate it. And to those of you who reached out to say hello, thank you again. It's great to speak to you and feel a sense of community developing around these stories. Thank you for listening. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. And that's my dog snoring in the background. I do apologise if you can hear that. Anyway, kuyu. Shinu, Morantang.